Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery.
Hi, my name is John Lavitt, and I am the principal content creator for Tarzana Treatment Centers. Welcome to Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. In this sub-series of our main episodes, we are now interviewing experts in recovery from around the country. And today we are really lucky to have as our guest, Yeshaia Blakeney. Yeshaia Blakeney is the co-founder of Recover Integrity and Antedote. He's also a rabbi as well, not practicing right now, I don't believe, but he has in the past. And what's interesting is that Yeshaia and I have known each other for over 20 years. And we met when I was in rehab at Beit Yeshuva, and Yeshaia had been in rehab before and was now actually kind of leading groups and sometimes as a counselor at Beit Yeshuva. And so basically the topic of today's episode is the role of spiritual counseling in treatment and recovery. So Yeshaia, I thought the best way to start, right, would be in a way to look at our own journey in recovery and take a look in a sense of the way spiritual counseling and spirituality played a role in it. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about that?
Well, first, thanks for having us, John. Appreciate it. Nice to spend time with you.
Always a pleasure.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me. And so looking at my own personal journey, maybe what role spirituality played, or how are you thinking about it? Is that the question?
Yes. And we're thinking about how it played in your journey in treatment and recovery. Mm-hmm. And in a sense of what it was in the beginning and how it became more important and who helped you along the way.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I think first I would say that both my experience of spirituality and my understanding of it has changed. Right? There's been something about it that's the same, therefore I can call both spirituality. But my understanding of my own journey has changed from early recovery till now, 20-something years later. But I think maybe it helps to define a little bit around what we mean by spirituality.
Absolutely.
And there's a quote by a guy named Martin Buber from a book called Eclipse of God. And in that book, he talks about faith. And he says, faith is an entrance into reality, the whole of reality, without reduction or curtailment. And so for me, spirituality has something to do with contact with myself, with you, with the world, with God, and with spirit. And both pathology, right, whether that's addiction, or whether that is a mental health condition, or whether that is trauma, has to do with something being in between me and reality, me and myself, and me and you.
And would you also say you're a higher power?
In God, yeah, of course.
In God.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because my first sponsor in recovery, he used to say, if you want to reduce the 12-step program down to a single concept, it's about faith and fear on a momentary basis. Mm-hmm. And I used to ask him, I remember when I put fear down on my list of character defects.
Yeah.
And he was like, no.
Yeah.
They're all forms of fear. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the Martin Buber quote, do you think, in a sense, fear is what is causing the impairment from reality and from ourselves?
I mean, I think I would agree with your sponsor that, human life exists in tensions, right? So I'm never sort of free of fear. And fear can cause me to run from reality or to run from myself, right? Psychically. And so in that regard, the answer would be yes. But I'm always, as a human agent, as a person with agency, I'm always working with fear to move towards deeper levels of contact, right? They call something like that courage, when I'm able to move despite fear. Encouragement is having somebody who's encouraging me to have more courage in the face of fear, to have more contact with reality.
That's so interesting, because I've never really thought about that connection between encouragement and courage. I mean, it's such a basic connection when you think about it, and it makes perfect sense. At Tarzana Treatment Centers, where I work, we have such a diverse population.
Yeah.
Where we have patients who are coming in from such extreme circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
from homelessness with extreme mental health issues,
Mm-hmm.
who are coming in from prison, and so in a sense, like that transition from going from fear to faith, and in a sense developing faith. How do you think you work with that population in terms of helping them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that population, and like you said, is very diverse.
Right.
So it's a very general question.
Okay.
There is a concept that I like quite a bit. It comes from a psychoanalyst named Wilfred Bion, and it's a term that's used a lot now, but he really defined it well. And he calls it container contained. He thinks about the psychoanalyst, and he's a kind of a spiritual guy, actually, attempting to provide a container for the person that they're working with. And that could be a community, right? That could be a church, that could be Tarzana Treatment Program, that could be Recover Integrity, that could be me with you. And the container is a mutual space that affords the capacity to risk coming in contact with truth. Right? If we were to be simple, we would say a container is something like a truthful, loving environment that is created by humans together. And so in a truthful and loving environment, it creates the highest likelihood of a person from a really challenged background to be able to risk thinking, experiencing, or feeling the truth of their life and pain, right?
And confronting their pain.
And being with their pain, yeah. Or feeling it, yeah, feeling their pain. I mean, pain is really felt, right? yeah.
That container sounds like, it's funny because right now I'm having a moment where, I grew up stuttering. And sometimes there's certain words that I get stuck on. And I know and I want to say the word, but I feel like I can't say the word. Community. There we go. I was able to say it.
Oh, amazing.
And so like the container is community in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
different levels of community.
It can be a community,
right?
For sure, right? I mean, communities obviously can be challenging as well. I actually would go back. I mean, it's interesting you bring up the stutter and the whole internal mechanisms that you've developed, or patterns you've probably developed in how to communicate in a way when a word gets stuck. And I'm sure that the stutter has a lot to do with the environment, the particular word, the person, the circumstance, the contact, as well as maybe neurology and other factors. But a container might be a space where you feel welcomed and encouraged to be who you are without reduction or curtailment, right? I mean, that's a great example. I just think of I think of the stuttering child, and the stuttering child's trauma in, going to middle school, perhaps, right? And how that trauma kind of builds on itself.
Well, and being picked on mercilessly.
This is what I'm saying, going to middle school and being picked on or bullied.
And the trauma of it, and that leading kind of in that Dr. Gabor Mate way of being what leads to the need for using drugs and alcohol.
Exactly right.
Because I remember when I first started smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
And it was like a revelation because I felt okay for the first time.
Yeah.
And I felt like, wow, this is something where I can have a community and I can have an identity.
Yeah. And
connect to people.
Yeah.
And I'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
As long as I have another joint.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know you, and I don't know that I know too many people that are better with words than you.
Well, thank you.
And so it's pretty deep to think about how God works in mysterious ways, right? Moses went to go free the people, but he had a stutter. So Aaron, his brother, God says to Moses, Aaron will be a prophet for you because you can't speak. You're my prophet, Moses, but Aaron will be your prophet. He'll be your mouth. Don't worry about it, right? And Moses' primary gift was that he was a prophet of God. He spoke the voice of God, but he couldn't talk. He'd stutter. It just reminds me of you, right? Like you just this wonderful gift with words. You know?
It's so funny that you bring up Moses because at Beit Teshuvah, when I was inpatient in, God, it was like 2003, 2004. One of the moments, in terms of like spiritual counseling, one of the moments when I had one of my first like the and you know we were just talking about this outside, the light bulb moment, like, poof, you know, was when Rabbi Mark Borovitz, who was a rabbi at Beit Teshuvah and one of the main spiritual counselors, it was during Torah study in the morning, and he was talking about the golden calf, where Moses has done all these miracles, the 10 plagues, you know, has parted the Red Sea, gotten the Jews out of Egypt, and here they are in the desert. They're getting manna from heaven to eat.
Yeah.
And he goes up to get the 10 commandments, leaves for a little bit, and they immediately build a golden calf and relapse on their old behaviors. And it was one of the first times when I understood, in a sense, what relapse was about, and how I had such little faith that even though I saw these miracles in my life, the moment I had any opportunity to doubt them or to question them, I would go right back to what I knew best.
Yeah.
It was really a profound moment.
Yeah. It's a good story.
Yeah. I loved, you know, I mean, I really started to find my spiritual path at Beit Teshuvah. You know, I remember feeling like when I was out there that I'd been forsaken. And I romanticized the idea of being forsaken. So like, look, if I'm going to be forsaken, then I'm going to be the most forsaken MF on the block. I'll show you.
Yeah.
And what was incredible was the realization that God had never turned whatever God is back on me, that I turned my back on God. You know?
Yeah. You know, you asked me a question, I didn't answer it. It was the first question you asked.
Okay.
Which was about, in early recovery, what role spirituality played. And I had to think about it for a little bit. My answer is kind of a simple one. I came into treatment facing 4 years in prison and had a court case.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I was very scared, speaking of fear. And I made a deal with God. And I mean, I basically told God I'd be a good boy. But what that meant for me at 21 years old, and developmentally I was probably more like 16, was basically I told God I would start telling the truth. So I would say the original sort of keystone for my spiritual path and spiritual growth and the role that spirituality played in my life was that I said I would start telling the truth. And you have to know the truth to tell it, so that's challenging.
Did you keep that compact?
Good enough that I didn't go back to jail.
Right.
So far he said, okay, good enough.
Okay, good enough.
Yeah, but I think it's important because, there is more to reality than we know. That much we know, right? We know for a fact there's more to reality than we know.
Yes.
Okay. I have my own opinions on those things.
I like to say on that note, like to say that there were basically monkeys with iPhones, and from a universal perspective, we just got out of the trees.
We're early on.
We are
early on in the biological and spiritual evolution of the species.
Right.
We're early on, which is awesome. So I like to try to ground spirituality in something practical, and something like a commitment to the truth is a much deeper thing than people think, right? I had a friend tell me one time, I just remember it, sometimes you just have these moments with people, or they grow spontaneously, but there's a friend of mine that says, yeah, I always keep my word. And for whatever reason, it just stuck in my ear. And I went, oh, really? I said, you always keep your word. I said, do you now? I said, please tell me, tell me about that. You always keep your word? Like when you say something, you always do it? And I saw him go from the revelation of, oh no, like I tend to keep my word when it comes to pretty important things,
Right.
which is what he meant.
Right.
To I always keep my word, right? And immediately that sort of crumbled as an idea. And so a commitment to something like integrity or something like the truth, it is a lifelong battle. I mean, and it's incredibly deep because, there's the living truth, there's living in truth, there's the truth of this, which is ultimately very mysterious, right? And so what does it mean to, to struggle, to fight, to have moments of grace, to attempt to live in accord with the truth? I don't say it's a deeply spiritual act. I would say if there were a couple of things that something like spirituality would be based on, as well as psychology, by the way, I would say they're love and truth.
And when I kind of talk to counselors and the mental health professionals and the staff at Tarzana Treatment Centers, when I talk to them about dealing with patients in early recovery, the patients who first came in, who are first coming in,
yeah,
it's like truth is barely even a concept for them.
Yes, of course.
I mean, they're so far away from it.
Yes.
And there's so much wrapped up in their, and this is one of the most brilliant parts of 12 steps,
Mm-hmm.
is the concept of the disease of perception.
Uh-huh.
Because the disease of perception for me is so connected to what prevents me from accessing spirituality.
100%. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because I don't see things correctly.
Yeah.
And I tend to see myself as the center of the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, egocentrism.
Yes.
Um,
We're getting very close to the end of
we can stop here if you
part,
like.
of part one here. I think. Oh no, we have a few more minutes to go.
Well, can I say one more thing about truth?
I'd love to hear more about truth. Thank you.
I think there's a deep alignment with the notion of, and I have a few things to say about 12-step, but I think there's a deep alignment between a notion of the truth and what 12-step refers to as God's will. And I think that when I use the term container, I'm speaking about it in a relational context, right? The therapist being a container for somebody to finally be with the truth and feel the pain of the truth.
Being a safe space.
Yeah, safe space, a container. I
Okay,
prefer the
got it.
term container. But ultimately, and then maybe the container becomes a 12-step community, right? Which is a non-judgmental, ideally, a non-judgmental community built on a hierarchy of values that value authenticity, service, and recovery, right? Versus all the things that society might value. So that becomes a container. A container maybe of a clinician, container of non-judgmental community like 12-step, or when you make a mistake, they just say, keep coming back. They don't kick you out or abandon you, right? That's a container. But ultimately, 12-step has this notion, and Judeo-Christianity has this notion of a higher power. And so ultimately truth, which is the living reality being generated by higher power, that's truth, the living reality being generated by higher power, is the ultimate container. Ultimately, right? Can I be with the living reality that is being generated right now by a superordinate power that I do not fully understand, right? That is to live in accordance with God's will. And when I can begin to have moments where I lean into that and begin to lean into that, to trusting that, which we all ultimately are going to be confronted with, towards the end of our lives. Can I trust reality? Can I surrender to the truth of this generated, animated, living experience we're having?
Isn't that connected in a sense to like the second and third step and letting go?
Yeah, surrender.
Surrender.
And there's a woman named Tosha Silver. It's not her original idea, but it's a very simple schematic of surrender. There's not surrendered, right? That's some form of pathology.
Right.
There's transactional surrender, which is where most of us live. Okay, God, I'll do this, as long as stuff doesn't get worse.
Keep me out of jail.
Yeah, keep me out of jail. Make sure I get some money in my pocket.
Exactly.
Or maybe it's a simple thing. I just want an apartment, with a woman I love. Whatever. It doesn't have to be grandiose, but it's transactional, which is fine. I think that's where most of us live. We're humans. We're not angels. And then there's, an unconditional surrender. That's Jesus on the cross. That's Rabbi Akiva being killed by the Romans while saying the Shema. That's the best human beings in the best moments of it's not about the outcome.
Right.
It's deeper than this. Right? So, those are the kind of notions of surrender. I like them. I think they're wise. There's a guy named Franz Rosenzweig who says something. Franz Rosenzweig? He's a Jewish philosopher? Yeah. He says something about God's will. He calls them commandments because he's speaking in a Jewish context that I think is really awesome. And he says, God's will is never a rule. Right? Like men have rules. God's will is never a rule, even if it's a commandment. Okay? He says God's will is never abstract. It's never some generalization. Right? That's not God's will. He says God's will is always specific and particular to something that is actually happening. That's the Jewish tradition agrees with that, right? The rabbinic tradition is constantly interpreting the law as a living thing, right? It's not just the rules, even though it has the 10 commandments. But then there's a lot of argument about, what that means. But here's the last part.
Okay.
And he says, and God wants of you to do God's will, never less and never more. And I love this idea. I just love this idea that in any moment of potential conflict and choice, God's will for me is particular and specific, and it's asking me to do something never more and never less.
See, I love the nevermore idea.
Isn't that deep?
Yes, that's
a deep one.
That's a profound, because I don't have to go over the top and beyond.
Those of us on the rescuing martyr end of the spectrum, he says, if you trust God, you don't bring your will into it.
Yes.
Which I love.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of this episode of Finding Hope, The Road to Recovery. And in part 2, we're going to do a little more of the application of how spiritual counseling and spiritual principles work with patients in the recovery process. Thank you so much. Hi, welcome back to Finding Hope, The Road to Recovery. This is part 2, where we're going to delve more into the role of spiritual counseling in treatment and recovery and working with patients. Once again, my guest is Yeshaia Blakeney, who is the co-founder of Recover Integrity and Antedote. Yeshaia, thank you again for being here.
Hi, John. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Always a pleasure. It's so funny when you connect with people who you've known for so long and you've gone on this recovery journey with, because there's a real sense of what I consider to be the very essence of spirituality. And for me, the very essence of spirituality is gratitude. And it's much easier for me to be grateful for like other people than for myself. Like I can't always see myself, but then when I see someone else's journey, that's where I take pleasure in, and that's where I feel the gratitude. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear you saying we have much more complicated relationships with ourselves when it comes to maybe self-love and appreciation than we might with somebody that we see once every 6 months who we're fond of.
Yes.
I would agree with that statement.
Absolutely. Well, I think also we can also see the evolution and the growth in another person a lot easier. And that's something which, one thing that I really like about working at Tarzana Treatment Centers is the fact that our populations include both adults and youth. Adolescents. We actually have outpatient mental health services for not just adolescents, but also for kids as young as 12 to 18. And then we have inpatient services in the Antelope Valley for youth, for substance use disorders. When you're dealing with youth, and you're a father with, is it 4 kids now? Which is amazing, and your beautiful wife.
Thank you.
Do you find that, in a sense, like spiritual counseling is important in that patient range, in that target range?
It's an interesting question. My experience with spiritual counseling is it has everything to do with somebody's receptivity, right? There are certain areas of human life that can be very triggering. One area that can be triggering for us all is, what is life ultimately about? It's a big question. You're talking about spirituality, you're talking about God, you're talking about the ultimate. That's
Right.
big. That's a big thing. It's not a little thing, right? You had said earlier, I thought God had turned God's back on me, but I turned my back on God. And that being a revelation for you. But thinking that thought, having that revelation was, that being born inside of you was quite an accomplishment. Had I said that to you at 13, right? Maybe you turned your back on God, maybe, right? That might or might not land with you.
Probably not.
Right? I mean, it just might or might not land with you,
Right.
My 4-year-old daughter asked me about God, and she said, "Why is God invisible?" That's 4, okay? What do you say to a kid like that? And I actually stole the answer from a friend of mine named John Vervaeke. And I said, you know how when you go outside, light shines all over you, but you can't see light? I said, but you know how it's everywhere, and everybody lives on light, and sees the light even though we can't see it? And she said, yeah. And I said, God's like that. And she goes, okay. And then she goes back and plays with her toys, So ultimately, I think, there's phrases like, when the student's ready, the teacher appears, and these kinds of things. There was a gentleman in my group yesterday who said he liked to divorce his spirituality from religion. And then he said, my higher power is a group of drunks, which is a wonderful idea in AA. But I have a relationship with him, and we've worked with each other, so there's a container there. And I said, well, can we think about this a little bit more? So why do you like to divorce spirituality from religion, first of all? I mean, just a question. And he says, well, because of all the terrible things religion has done. I said, okay. I said, I hear that. I said, have you studied the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step program? I said, do you know where it comes from? Do you know its roots, its lineage? And he said, no, not really. And I said, you might want to get curious about that. And I said, I'll save you a little bit of the suspense. I said, if the Judeo-Christian tradition didn't exist, I doubt that room full of drunks would either. I said, and the fact that you like that room full of drunks doesn't have to do with how you participate in it, right? Like if it was a room full of drunks, but you were being a total schmuck and not welcoming anybody, I said, wouldn't that be a hateful, kind of horrible thing?
And making it all about you.
Yeah, I said, wouldn't it, wouldn't the 12-step religion, folk religion, be a harmful place, not a helpful place? Doesn't it have to do with how people act within this lineage or tradition? And so you have to work where people are at. And generally, you have to have a relationship to do it. And so the most spiritual thing you can do with adolescents and youth is make genuine relationships with them and realizing they're living in a world. Their world. They have a world of hopes and dreams and shame and guilt and mystery and things they're aware of and things they're not aware of, just like we have worlds. And so the most spiritual thing you can do is honor the fact that you're there with a kind of an infinite young human being who's got their own world. What's their world like? And once you begin to understand their world because they've let you in it, you might be able to see some of the horizons of that world. And you might be able to through relationship and exploration, raise that imagination horizon a little bit so that they can begin to experience a little bit more of the world in a way that encourages them to grow.
I really like one word that you use there, which is the idea of mystery.
Oh, yeah.
Because the idea of mystery, for me, it kind of like, it's in a sense making a young person comfortable with the question mark and letting them know that they don't always have to have an exclamation point.
Beautiful. Well put, John.
You know, it's so important because I like also there's a famous I love the apocryphal sayings in AA that that aren't in the book or aren't in the literature but that everyone knows, and one of them is religion is for people who want to go to heaven. Spirituality is for people who have been to hell.
Oh, that's cool.
And I always feel like what that means, in a sense, is that spirituality is much more of an internal process, and religion is much more like an external institution.
Yeah. Well, I find myself, maybe foolishly defending religion in some sense, but there's a commandment: honor thy father and mother. It's a very controversial commandment, in my opinion, for a variety of reasons. But one of the challenges, I think, for the human species is that we carry this intergenerational trauma. We come from these histories of the people before us living and dying. And in some sense, I have this vision that part of what each of our struggle is to reconcile and carry forward what happened before us in a way that's honorable. And so I think we'll honor our father and mother. And I think about 12-step culture, again, a folk religion, as a child of religion, which it is, actually, if we look at the history of it, right?
Right.
And so I think, it's going to be difficult for our species to heal without reconciling with the fact that these hyper-objects we could call religions that are bigger than all of us, and they're the carriers of lineage and song and ritual and prayer and history,
Legacy,
and myth, and some of our ancestors died, in these religions, for these religions, with these religions, that I actually think we shouldn't be so quick to divorce spirituality from religion. I think there's a reconciliation process, an alignment process that needs to happen over time with where we come from, and recognize that we are not above religion, in some
well,
sense.
and I think it connects to a key word that you brought up, which was trauma. Right now, healing trauma is not just in the individual, but it's in the institution as well.
100%.
And what's so interesting about healing trauma in the institution is I see that now with my work with Tarzana Treatment Centers. Is Tarzana Treatment Centers right now, we are moving away from the abstinence model, and we're moving more towards a harm reduction model.
Yeah.
And we're also moving towards the idea of, right now as a principal content creator, I'm actually promoting a trauma workshop that we are giving for professionals. And the fact is, like, trauma plays such an essential role in terms of both our mental health services and our STD services.
Yeah, substance services, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What is the relationship when you're working at, Recover Integrity,
Yeah.
with people in early recovery, and you're working trying to, like, in a sense, employ spiritual counseling as a way to address their trauma?
Intriguing. Well, there's sort of three things.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah. Well, there's a phrase that I have that I repeat often, which is spirituality is incomplete without psychology, and psychology is incomplete without spirituality. And so I think a person who does not have a basic understanding of how the psychology of humans, of the human species, works, is working blindly. They might get it right, but it's by luck. Because there are facets of the human psyche that are real, phenomenologically real, and important to know.
Right.
Right? Like we have an unconscious. We have a conscious, we have what Freud called a superego, right? We have an internal rule structure that we introjected as children that can produce guilt and shame, but also regulate us.
And we have a collective unconscious, which is very much connected to our institutions.
Of course, right? And I had a lot of thoughts about the institution thing, but we'll put that to the side. So first, I really want to understand how somebody's psyche is operating. Period. Like I want to know, does this person have a punitive inner voice? It's really important. If somebody has a punitive inner voice, I might bring up Judaism or something like this, or a certain kind of concept that they recoil from internally because it's reinforcing an internal punishing idea of God that they might have, right? Maybe from their parents or whatever else that might be. Not even necessarily from religion, just because they have a punitive internal God that lives inside of their psyche, right? So I would want to understand what's it like inside of there if I'm going to do some spiritual counseling. So I would say skillful spiritual counseling has to do with understanding how guilt and shame are operating in a given personality. And if I can understand how guilt and shame operate within you, then together we can begin to explore how it is we can take the risks of being human, of more fully living and having more contact with reality, which is what I think of as the goal of spiritual counseling. How do I live in more truth? How can I have access to and give more love, right? That's kind of the core tasks to me. Meaning more, take the risks of really living more and more, really caring, really loving, and really being honest.
And the risk of the question mark.
And of course the unknown.
Yeah.
Right? Ultimately, the psyche defends against the unknown, and we retreat into narratives, into story or dissociation or other forms of pathology when confronted with the unknown uncontained. Yeah. Yes, that's true.
No container.
Yeah, and because we can actually face the unknown if we feel held by it.
You know what I tell my sponsees?
What's that?
What I say to them is, when it comes to looking at the future and the question mark, stop looking at it as though it's an accusation.
Yeah. Because
I used to see the question mark as like the only answers for it were one form of doom or another.
Yeah.
I was effed, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm doing well, not cursing, by the way.
You are doing well.
But
can I say one thing about that, John?
Yeah, but one thing about it. Just let me finish this one thought, which is what I tell them instead is why not look at the future as though it's a Price is Right. You don't know what's behind door number 3, but it could be awesome.
Yeah.
I
think that's right. I want to connect the two, this question of the unknown and this question of trauma.
Okay.
Ultimately, I think a trauma is when reality overwhelms your capacity and it creates a rupture of some kind in the ordinary, I call it musicality of your life. Even if the musicality of your life was crap to begin with, it was yours and it was the rhythm that you were used to. And something happened, either a dynamic or an event, that overwhelmed your capacity and changed the music of your life.
Okay.
Right? The pattern. But connecting that to a notion of the unknown, what a trauma does is it exposes you to elements of reality that were hidden from you in the past. And sometimes those elements of reality were things that you hid from because they were bad. It turns out my mom didn't love me. Right? But I lived in a world where I somehow rationalized that until an event happened that, overwhelmed my capacity to be with it, and I fell apart. And then, 5 years into therapy, I actually have a thought, an unthought thought that I was unable to think before because it was such a dangerous thought, which is maybe my mom didn't love me. That's a hard thought to think. That's a hard thing to feel, right?
Unbelievable.
So that even encroaching upon me in the moment created a trauma because I couldn't face it, right? And then 5 years later, with containment, with help, with recovery, maybe I can face that. And then maybe later I can go, wow, she was born in this particular situation. I'm a human being in a world where trauma happens. Maybe I come to forgive them. Maybe I don't, whatever. But in that regard, I like to say every trauma is a question.
Every trauma is a question.
Yeah, when we talk about the unknown, every trauma is a question. And I go back and forth, but lately I've been saying every trauma is a question that will be answered in a participatory way in the fullness of time. Maybe not in your lifetime, but in the fullness of time, right? Every trauma is a question that will be answered in a participatory way in the fullness of time.
But in that case, you have to be willing to participate.
Yeah. And you have to live with the question, which is my point.
And live with the question.
You have to be with the question. I don't know what this means. What am I supposed to make of this?
Right. And a question that sometimes is remarkably uncomfortable. For example, like at Tarzana Treatment Centers, we're dealing sometimes with incredibly traumatized populations.
Yes.
When I'm driving around the city, Los Angeles,
yeah,
and Los Angeles County, and I see people on the streets, and I see people going through what they're going through. It brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah, good for you.
It's like there's just, I can't imagine spending a week on the street without becoming traumatized.
Yeah, sure.
How quickly the trauma happens and how profoundly it is ingrained in someone's soul. And so in a sense, with spiritual counseling, when you're dealing with someone in which those scars run so deep, how do you heal them so the scars do not prevent the mobility that is needed, the fluidity that is needed in spirituality?
Well, I think, first of all, you're saying something beautiful, which you're bringing in the term soul. And when you bring in the term soul, you're automatically making some kind of distinction there, right? You're not saying the body, you're saying the soul. Right? And so, in my mind, you're already doing something awesome, which is to say, hey, if we are trying to conceive and speak about what it means to be human, we can only conceive or speak about that in scales and levels, right? So one level of being is the body and the nervous system. That's a real thing.
No question.
The nervous system is a real thing.
I feel
Physiology, metabolism, nervous system, anxiety, paranoia, all relate back to this human vehicle that we call the body, right? And so first things first, it's very difficult to be able to get better, to heal, if my nervous system can't relax and feel safe. And we have all these wonderful trauma modalities now, and sometimes medications and all kinds of interesting research and interventions that are happening to attempt to calm the nervous system. Because my body and my nervous system can actually hijack my psychological processes. So on one level, we are biological organisms who have bodies.
Right.
That's real, right? And there are even sub-levels to that.
And you see what you're talking about. You see it in nature. You watch nature documentaries and you see the antelope on the plains.
Yeah. Of course.
And it's natural because they're always under the threat of because they're food.
We're mammals.
Right.
We're organisms. This is a perfectly reasonable way to understand a human being. And if you skip that part, you're very confused.
Right.
We also are psychological creatures, which is interesting. We're not just biology, we also are self-referential psychological creatures that think about ourselves and the nature of existence, and the psyche is structured in particular ways, right? We are neurological, we are psychological.
And narrative creatures.
We're storytelling creatures, we're semantic creatures. We are also agents. Somehow, we have capacity to influence the direction of our being. There are also agents in the world. We have these things called wills. We have things called desires. We have fears. We're agents, directional agents in the world. Complex agents, actually, different than cells, which are also agents, but different, right? Okay, oh wow, we're agents. And then we get into, the metaphysical and we say, and perhaps we are spirits. or we are souls. And some of us have had spiritual experiences and soul experiences. And all of those levels of the human are interrelated. And so sometimes a soulful moment can deeply influence my psychology, and sometimes a soulful moment can deeply influence my biology, which is also intriguing. Sometimes I could be saying a prayer and I begin to cry. Isn't it interesting? I mean, I'll give an example. It often happens to me in the morning. My son is having a bar mitzvah, and I've committed, this is my third bar mitzvah, and I'm actually going to help this time. And so I said, I'm going to drill prayers with him. I'm going to teach him the prayers. And he's doing the Ve'ahavta, which is a prayer about loving God with all your heart and all your might and all your life. And so we were practicing it. And then on the way, when I go to drop him off at the school bus, we've been practicing in the car. And I drop him off after we practiced in the prayer. And I remember my mom used to play this Debbie Friedman tape, which is an old corny Reform Jewish singer, on the way to school. I remember one day I hit the eject button, I threw the tape out of the window. I just couldn't stand how corny the music was when I was 10 years old. But all of a sudden I said, well, actually, she had kind of a pretty version of the Ve'ahavta prayer in English. I think I'd like to hear it. And so I put it on, coming back from the bus for my son. I put on Debbie Friedman singing this song that I hated when I was a kid, of this prayer about loving God. And as the words come on, I begin to cry. It affected my nervous system. It affected my spirit. It affected my soul. And then there was what I call a God moment. As I'm listening to the words in English, which I knew, but I hadn't made the connection. I didn't know. I had made the connection. In the prayer, it says, and you shall teach these words to your children. What was I just doing?
And that made you cry even more.
I was teaching the words to my children.
Right, you were sharing it with the children and sharing it, and from an intergenerational perspective, sharing it with your child as your mother had shared it with you.
Yeah, and so Jung would call this a synchronicity.
Yes.
Right. Jung would say, this is when our inner worlds and our outer worlds align in a moment of connection, having something to do with an order beyond the order that's immediately available to us. I call that a spiritual moment, when we're able to witness patterns of reality beyond what we are normally receptive to, and they strike us deeply. And so with deeply traumatized people, if we're lucky, we can have soulful moments that contribute to releasing wounds and grief and trauma, right? I mean, crying is the physiological release of embedded grief and loss that exists inside of our system that physiologically manifests in our eyes watering, right? Which is unbelievable how deep that is, isn't it?
It is. I feel also like spirituality opens the door to healing. Spirituality opens the door to healing, but it won't do the work.
Oh, this is fantastic.
Basically, just because the door is open, I still have to do the work.
Yes.
And that work is so difficult. I remember when we were talking about white light experience. When I had my white light experience, what reality is to a dream, that white light experience became to reality. Mm. And so the day that I had my white light experience feels like a dream almost. Mm-hmm. Like I know what happened before and I know what happened after, because I actually went directly from having that experience. I was on the Greek island of Patmos to talk to my mentor about it. And I know, but that feels more like a dream, and the white light experience feels like reality.
Yeah, sure.
And I feel like, in a sense, what that means to me is that I have to work to make the dream real.
100%.
I want to, and Yeshaia, we could literally go on for 3 or 4 more hours without any problem.
We could.
Okay?
We could. Let's do it.
But I want to. But now, unfortunately, this part of the episode is coming to an end.
Yeah.
And I felt like ending on the good must be chosen was such a beautiful place to end, because it connects to the empowerment of recovery. You have the choice to make that choice. And I don't always make it, but I know like that's where spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection, comes into play. I make it a lot more than I made it before.
Yeah, man.
And thank you so much for being here,
Thanks,
my friend.
John. It was my pleasure.
You know, it's just. I mean, I'm just. I have such deep respect and such a deep, just admiration for your journey.
Oh, thank you, man.
And for you as a family man, and you as a professional, and you as just someone who truly doesn't just like talk the talk, but walks the walk.
Working on it.
And it's just a pleasure to be here. So thank you for taking part in finding hope, the road to recovery.
You're very welcome. God bless you too, John.
My friend.
Thanks, brother.
Brought to you by Tarzana Treatment Centers. You can visit our website at www.tarzanatc.org or call 1-800-996-1051.